Scientists warn the price of food is expected to increase every year from now on. Climate change, and specifically rising temperatures, may cause food prices to increase by 3.2% per year, according to a new study by researchers in Germany. As climate change continues to worsen, this price inflation will mean more and more people around the world don't have a varied and healthy diet, or simply don't have enough food. The new analysis shows that global warming could cause food prices inflation to increase by between 0.9 and 3.2% every pointage per year by the year 2035. The same warming will cause a smaller rise in overall inflation between 0.3 and 1.2% points, so a greater proportion of household income will need to be spent on buying food. This effect will be felt worldwide by high and low income countries alike, but nowhere more so than in the global south. And as with various other consequences of climate change, Africa will be worse affected despite contributing little to its causes. Our own research on food security in Ghana, West Africa, gives a sense of what price inflation might mean in practice. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change describes West Africa as a hotspot of climate change, with models predicting extreme rising temperatures and reduced rainfall, with more than half of the population being directly dependent on rain-fed agriculture. Ghana is particularly vulnerable to climate change. And the scientist said, we recently carried out a study in Mion, a rural district in the north of the country. We spoke to about 400 people, and every single one of them told us that they had experienced some level of food insecurity in the previous 12 months. Some 99% said climate change was at least partly to blame. Additionally, 62% were moderately or severely food insecure, with 26% experiencing severe food insecurity, going without food for an entire day. These percentages are much worse than Ghana's national average, 39% and 6% respectively, but similar to some of the poorest countries in West Africa, such as Togo, Burkina Faso, and Benin. We also carried out a small study among refugees from neighboring Burkina Faso who fled across the border to the Upper East region of Ghana. Again, 100% had experienced food insecurity. Mion is not suffering from the sudden famine, and nothing particularly unusual has happened to cause this food insecurity. The situation is considered to be a normal phenomenon due to the effects of climate change. Climate-related food inflation can be broken down into two interlinked problems: shifting seasons, pests, and diseases. The first is that the same climate change effects that are causing the inflation are already making food harder to get hold of. For instance, higher temperatures can cause long-established and predictable farming seasons to shift, and so may hinder crop production. Other consequences may include more pests and disease outbreaks that deplete livestock and food reserves, and heat stress to already poor roads, which make it harder to access rural communities. All of these factors push prices higher and reduce the purchasing power of affected households. The drivers of food inflation are already worsening food insecurity. The second part of this problem is the rise in inflation itself. A 3% annual price increase would mean households are less able to purchase what they need. They would likely need to compromise on quality or perhaps even culturally imported foods. This in turn makes people more vulnerable to disease and other health issues. Malnutrition is the leading cause of immunodeficiency globally. In Ghana, we found that those who reported more knowledge of climate change were more likely to be food secure, and this is despite few people having any formal education. This is evidence that affected populations are very aware of the changing temperatures and unpredictability of the climate, and are perhaps engaging in proactive mitigation practices. And those without any schooling are more likely to engage in a climate-sensitive occupation such as farming, and so would be more immediately exposed. Teaching people about climate change might provide some capacity to adapt to it and therefore increase food security. Alterations in the climate are a hunger risk multiplier for those populations with entrenched vulnerability. In light of this, 134 countries at COP28 signed a declaration to incorporate food systems into their climate action to ensure everyone has enough to eat in light of climate change. The researchers behind the new study suggest that reducing greenhouse gas emissions could limit any impacts on the global economy, and we also suggest that diversifying economies would serve as some protection for those communities reliant on agriculture for both their food and income. Government intervention could also ensure financial protection and nutritional aid for those vulnerable to becoming trapped in the poverty cycle by inflation and diminished accessibility to food. This is from the conversation here under Creative Commons on Science Alert by Jessica Boxall, Public Health and Nutrition Research Fellow, University of Southampton, and Michael Head, Senior Researcher Fellow in Global Health, University of Southampton, both in the UK, of course. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.